Jung discovered 7 psychological environments that destroy 90% of people's mental strength. These aren't physical places. They're mental traps you enter every day without realizing it. Most people spend years in these spaces, wondering why they feel drained, anxious, or lost. They blame themselves, but Jung knew the truth. Certain environments literally rewire your brain to work against you. In 1961, Jung treated a patient who seemed perfectly normal, but was slowly losing his mind. Jung traced the problem back to 7 specific psychological spaces this man inhabited daily. Once Jung helped him recognize and escape these mental traps, his patient transformed completely. Today, I'll show you exactly which places are breaking your mind, how to recognize when you're trapped in them, and Jung's escape protocol that can save your sanity. Because what Jung discovered about these dangerous spaces will change how you see every relationship, every room, and every decision for the rest of your life. The first and most dangerous place Jung identified is the echo chamber, where every voice around you mirrors your own thoughts, beliefs, and biases back to you until they feel like absolute truth. Jung's patients spent hours each day in social clubs and political gatherings where everyone shared his exact views, fears about social changes, and anger towards certain groups. He thought he was staying informed, but Jung realized he was getting psychologically poisoned. Here's what happens to your brain in an echo chamber. Your neural pathways literally weaken. Dr. Matthew Lieberman's research at UCLA shows that when you're never challenged, your critical thinking muscles atrophy like unused limbs. Jung called this collective possession, when group thinking replaces individual thought. The patient stopped questioning anything because questioning felt like betrayal. His worldview became rigid, fragile, and terrified of different perspectives. The warning signs you're trapped in an echo chamber. You can predict what everyone around you will say about any topic. Different opinions feel personally threatening rather than intellectually interesting. You've stopped asking, "What if I'm wrong?" about your core beliefs. Your conversations reinforce rather than challenge your thinking. Jung discovered that people in echo chambers don't just stop growing, they start shrinking. Their minds become smaller, more fearful, and more dependent on the group for psychological safety. But this is just the beginning of how these places destroy you. Because echo chambers make you mentally weak, therefore you become vulnerable to the second dangerous place, the comparison arena, where your worth is measured against everyone else's achievements and status. Jung's patient, already fragile from echo chamber thinking, started obsessively comparing his life to others in his social circle. Every success story from acquaintances felt like personal failure. Every achievement felt meaningless because someone else had accomplished more. Dr. Rachel Calagero's research at the University of the West of England proves what Jung observed. Constant comparison literally shrinks the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for self-worth and decision-making. Here's the psychological trap. Comparison doesn't motivate you to improve. It trains your brain to find inadequacy everywhere. Jung called this the inflation-deflation cycle. You either feel superior or inferior, never simply yourself. The patient told Jung, "I got promoted at work, but all I could think about was how my college friend became CEO faster. His achievements became meaningless because they weren't relative victories." Warning signs you're trapped in the comparison arena. Other people's success makes you feel like a failure. You achieve goals but feel empty because someone did it better. You edit your life to match what looks successful rather than what feels right. Your happiness depends on being ahead of others. Jung realized this place is particularly deadly because it disconnects you from your own values and desires. You stop pursuing what brings you joy and start chasing what brings recognition. But the third place is even more insidious. Before we continue, you need to understand the science behind why these places are so dangerous. Modern neuroscience has proven Jung's observations about environmental psychology. Dr. Daniel Siegel's research shows that toxic psychological environments trigger chronic cortisol release, which literally shrinks your hippocampus, the brain region responsible for memory and emotional regulation. But here's what Jung understood before neuroscience could prove it. These places don't just damage you temporarily. They rewire your default mental state. Spend enough time in toxic psychological environments, and your brain starts recreating their patterns even when you're alone. Jung's patient developed what neuroscientists now call learned helplessness. His brain had been trained by these environments to expect failure, criticism, and inadequacy. Even in safe spaces, he couldn't relax because his neural pathways had been carved by psychological danger. This is why Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." These places program your unconscious mind to work against you. The most disturbing part? Most people don't realize they're being programmed because the damage happens gradually, subtly, beneath conscious awareness. The third dangerous place Jung identified is the performance theater, where authenticity is punished and you're rewarded only for wearing the right mask. Jung's patient worked in a corporate environment where showing any vulnerability was career suicide. He learned to laugh at jokes that weren't funny, agree with ideas he opposed, and hide any part of himself that didn't fit the company culture. Jung called this persona identification, when the mask you wear becomes the only identity you recognize. The patient told Jung, "I don't know who I am anymore. I've been performing for so long that the real me feels like a stranger." This place is psychologically deadly because it trains you to abandon yourself gradually. Each compromise feels small, but they compound into complete self-betrayal. Dr. Kristin Neff's research on self-compassion shows that people trapped in performance theaters develop severe inner critics. They internalize the harsh judgment of these environments and carry it everywhere. Warning signs you're in a performance theater. You feel exhausted after social interactions, not energized. You catch yourself agreeing with things you don't believe. You're afraid to share opinions that might be unpopular. You feel like you're wearing a costume that you can't take off. Your real thoughts and feelings seem dangerous or inappropriate. The patient described it perfectly. "I became so good at being what others wanted that I forgot what I wanted. And when I tried to remember, there was nothing there." Jung realized this place doesn't just hide your authentic self, it erases it, layer by layer, compromise by compromise, until you're a hollow performance with no core. Because performance theaters teach you to hide your real self, therefore you become trapped in the fourth dangerous place, the silent suffering space, where emotional needs are buried under the illusion of stability. Jung encountered this constantly in his practice. Patients from perfect families, where love was assumed but never expressed, where problems were ignored rather than addressed, where keeping up appearances mattered more than genuine connection. The patient Jung treated came from exactly this type of family. "We never fought," he told Jung, "but we never really talked either. I learned that having needs was selfish and expressing pain was weakness." This space creates what Jung called emotional starvation. Your emotional needs don't disappear when ignored. They fester in the unconscious, creating anxiety, depression, and inexplicable emptiness. Dr. Sue Johnson's research on attachment shows that emotional suppression in relationships literally dysregulates the nervous system. Your body stays in a state of chronic stress because your emotional needs are constantly unmet. The most dangerous aspect of this place is how normal it feels. The patient told Jung, "I thought we were a close family because we never had conflict. I didn't realize that avoiding conflict also meant avoiding intimacy." Warning signs you're trapped in silent suffering. You feel lonely even when surrounded by people. You've learned to cope with pain rather than heal from it. Asking for emotional support feels selfish or weak. You have strong feelings but nowhere safe to express them. Peace in your relationships feels brittle, like it could shatter if you're too honest. Jung discovered that people in this space develop a profound disconnection from their own emotional reality. They know something is wrong, but can't name it, because naming it would break the family or group's unspoken rules. The fifth dangerous place is the exact opposite of silence, the chaos storm, where constant mental stimulation drowns out your inner voice until you can't hear yourself think. Jung's patient lived in this state constantly, newspapers demanding his attention, radio programs feeding anxiety, social gatherings draining his energy, work demands following him home. He filled every quiet moment with reading, conversation, or activity because silence felt unbearable. But Jung realized this wasn't preference, it was avoidance. The patient was afraid of what he might discover in stillness, unresolved pain, difficult decisions, or parts of himself he didn't want to face. Dr. Adam Ghazali's research at UCSF shows that chronic mental stimulation literally impairs your ability to form coherent thoughts and make clear decisions. Your prefrontal cortex becomes overwhelmed and starts making impulsive choices just to reduce cognitive load. Jung called this psychic fragmentation, when your attention is so scattered that you lose the ability to integrate experiences into wisdom. The patient consumed enormous amounts of information, but couldn't make sense of any of it. Here's the trap. Chaos becomes addictive. Your brain adapts to high stimulation and starts craving more intense input to feel normal. Quiet moments trigger anxiety because your nervous system has forgotten how to self-regulate. Warning signs you're trapped in the chaos storm. Silence makes you immediately reach for a book, newspaper, or turn on the radio. You have strong opinions about everything, but deep understanding of nothing. You feel busy, but can't remember what you accomplished. Slowing down triggers anxiety rather than peace. You consume information constantly, but feel empty inside. The patient told Jung, "I stay busy because when I stop, all the things I'm avoiding catch up with me, but I'm so tired of running." Because the chaos storm teaches you to avoid your inner voice, therefore you become vulnerable to the sixth dangerous place, the self-abandonment chamber, where you systematically ignore your own needs, instincts, and truth. This is the most insidious place because it happens gradually. You say yes when everything inside screams no. You stay in relationships that drain you because leaving feels harder than enduring. You choose comfort over authenticity, safety over growth. Jung's patient described it perfectly. "I became so good at ignoring my gut instincts that I stopped having them. I made every decision based on what others expected, what seemed practical, or what would avoid conflict." Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's research on trauma shows that chronic self-abandonment literally disconnects you from your body's wisdom. You lose the ability to recognize what you need, want, or feel, because those signals have been consistently overridden. Jung called this soul loss, not a mystical concept, but a psychological reality where you become estranged from your own core self. The patient said, "I felt like I was living someone else's life. I couldn't remember the last time I made a decision based on what I actually wanted." This place is particularly dangerous because it masquerades as maturity, responsibility, or selflessness. Society often rewards self-abandonment, making it harder to recognize as a problem. Warning signs you're in the self-abandonment chamber. You can't remember the last time you checked in with your own feelings. Your decisions are based on what's expected rather than what feels right. You've stopped having preferences about things that used to matter to you. You feel like you're living on autopilot. When someone asks what you want, you genuinely don't know. Jung realized this place creates a terrifying emptiness. The patient told him, "I succeeded at everything I was supposed to want, but I felt completely hollow inside. I didn't know who I was beneath all the should-dos and have-tos." The seventh and most dangerous place Jung identified exists entirely within your own mind. The shadow basement, where you've locked away parts of yourself you're too afraid or ashamed to face. Jung's patient had spent years avoiding this internal space. Every time painful memories, shameful thoughts, or difficult emotions surfaced, he pushed them down into what Jung called the personal unconscious. But Jung discovered something terrifying. What you bury doesn't stay buried. It grows stronger in the darkness, influencing your behavior in ways you don't understand. The patient found himself sabotaging relationships, overreacting to minor slights, and repeating patterns he swore he'd never repeat. Dr. Peter Levine's research on trauma shows that unprocessed emotional content literally lives in your nervous system, creating chronic dysregulation until it's consciously integrated. Jung called this shadow possession, when the parts of yourself you've rejected start controlling your life from the unconscious. The patient told Jung, "I became everything I hate about my father, but I couldn't see it happening until the damage was done." The shadow basement is dangerous because avoidance gives these rejected parts more power, not less. They manifest as projection, addiction, sudden rage, or inexplicable self-sabotage. But here's what Jung discovered. The shadow also contains tremendous power and creativity. The patient's anger, once integrated consciously, became passionate advocacy. His sadness became deep empathy. His shame became fierce compassion for others struggling with similar issues. Warning signs you're avoiding the shadow basement. You have strong emotional reactions that surprise you. You repeat relationship patterns despite knowing better. You judge others harshly for traits you secretly fear in yourself. You have persistent anxiety or depression with no clear cause. You feel like you're fighting an invisible enemy inside yourself. Jung realized that healing requires descending into this basement, not with self-judgment, but with curiosity and compassion. Now that you can recognize these 7 dangerous places, how do you escape them? Jung developed what he called the individuation process, a systematic approach to psychological freedom. Step 1. Conscious recognition. You can't leave a place you don't know you're in. Jung's patient had to honestly assess which of these environments he inhabited daily. This requires brutal honesty, without self-judgment. Step 2. Environmental audit. Examine every space you regularly enter, physical and digital. Jung taught that awareness transforms unconscious influence into conscious choice. Ask yourself, does this environment help me grow or keep me small? Step 3. Strategic withdrawal. You don't need to abandon your life, but you must limit exposure to toxic psychological environments. Jung's patient started with small changes, limiting time in toxic social circles, setting boundaries with negative people, creating daily periods of solitude and reflection. Step 4. Conscious integration. This is where Jung's approach becomes revolutionary. Instead of just avoiding negative environments, you must consciously create positive ones. Seek out people who challenge you kindly, environments that support growth, spaces where authenticity is valued. Step 5. Shadow work. Jung believed that until you face what you've hidden in the shadow basement, you'll unconsciously recreate toxic patterns everywhere you go. This requires therapy, journaling, or other methods of bringing unconscious content into awareness. Step 6. Regular maintenance. Jung discovered that psychological freedom requires ongoing vigilance. These dangerous places are seductive because they offer false comfort, easy belonging, or familiar patterns. You must consciously choose growth over comfort, truth over convenience. The patient told Jung after 6 months, "I didn't realize how much mental energy I was spending in those toxic spaces. Now that I've left them, I feel like I have my mind back." Jung documented remarkable transformations when people escaped these psychological traps. His patient's story became a blueprint for thousands of others seeking mental freedom. Within 3 months of leaving the echo chamber, the patient's critical thinking improved dramatically. He started questioning his assumptions, seeking diverse perspectives, and making decisions based on evidence rather than groupthink. After escaping the comparison arena, he discovered interests and goals that were genuinely his own. He stopped measuring his worth against others and started pursuing work that aligned with his values rather than his image. Leaving the performance theater was harder because it required disappointing people who preferred his mask to his authentic self. But Jung taught him that relationships based on false performance aren't real relationships at all. The silent suffering space required learning entirely new communication skills. The patient had to practice expressing needs, setting boundaries, and asking for support, skills his family had never modeled. Escaping the chaos storm meant developing tolerance for stillness, boredom, and the anxiety that initially arose in quiet moments. But Jung knew that wisdom only emerges in contemplative space. The self-abandonment chamber required the scariest change, making decisions based on his own truth rather than external expectations. This meant disappointing some people, but it also meant finally living authentically. The shadow basement work was ongoing, but each integration made him more whole, more compassionate, and less likely to project his issues onto others. Jung observed that people who escape these places don't just feel better, they become different people entirely. Their relationships improve, their decision-making clarifies, and they develop what Jung called psychological sovereignty. What Jung discovered about his patient's transformation reveals something profound about psychological environments. When you change your relationship to these spaces, you change the spaces themselves. The patient's family initially resisted his new boundaries and emotional honesty. They tried to pull him back into silent suffering because his growth threatened their familiar patterns. But Jung taught him to maintain his changes with compassion, not aggression. Gradually, his authenticity gave others permission to be real. His sister started expressing her own long-buried feelings. His father admitted to depression he'd hidden for decades. The family system began healing because one person refused to participate in dysfunction. At work, the patient stopped performing and started contributing authentically. Some colleagues felt threatened, but others were inspired. He discovered that authentic leadership was more powerful than performance-based people-pleasing. Jung called this the ripple effect of individuation. When you stop participating in toxic psychological patterns, you force those patterns to either evolve or dissolve. The patient told Jung, "I thought changing myself would make me lonely, but it actually attracted people who wanted real connection. I traded many relationships for a few meaningful ones, and it was the best exchange I ever made." This is Jung's ultimate insight about these dangerous places. They persist because we collectively agree to inhabit them. But when enough individuals choose psychological freedom, the collective environment transforms. Remember Jung's original discovery. 90% of people's mental strength is destroyed by these 7 psychological environments. But now you know something most people don't. You can choose differently. Jung's patient started as a man slowly losing his mind in spaces that felt normal, even comfortable. He ended as someone who had reclaimed his psychological sovereignty and helped others do the same. The 7 dangerous places Jung identified aren't just abstract concepts. They're real psychological environments you encounter every day. The echo chamber that confirms your biases while weakening your mind. The comparison arena that makes your achievements meaningless. The performance theater that rewards fake and punishes real. The silent suffering space that buries your needs under false peace. The chaos storm that drowns your inner voice in noise. The self-abandonment chamber where you betray yourself gradually. And the shadow basement where you lock away parts of your soul. But Jung also showed us the way out. Not through escape or avoidance, but through conscious recognition, strategic choices, and the courage to grow beyond what's comfortable. The patient Jung treated in 1961 went on to become a therapist himself, helping others recognize and escape these same psychological traps. He understood that mental strength isn't about avoiding difficulty, it's about choosing which difficulties serve your growth. Jung's final lesson: these places will always exist, and they'll always be seductive. Echo chambers offer easy belonging. Comparison arenas promise motivation. Performance theaters provide approval. Silent suffering feels like peace. Chaos storms distract from pain. Self-abandonment avoids conflict. Shadow basements hide shame. But true mental strength comes from choosing growth over comfort, authenticity over approval, and consciousness over convenience. The question isn't whether you'll encounter these dangerous places. You will. The question is, will you recognize them when you do? Will you have the courage to leave? And will you create the kind of psychological environment where others can be free too? Jung believed that the future of human consciousness depends on individuals brave enough to choose psychological freedom over collective unconsciousness. That choice starts with recognizing where you are right now and deciding where you want to be. Your mind is not your enemy, but the places you allow it to inhabit might be. Which of these 7 dangerous places have you spent too much time in? Share your recognition in the comments. Sometimes naming where we've been is the first step towards psychological freedom. Don't forget to subscribe for more insights that can transform your relationship with your own mind. If you're ready to explore more of Jung's insights about psychological transformation, check out my video on the most dangerous Carl Jung psychology sign. Stay alert, where I reveal the warning signs that indicate someone is projecting their unconscious shadow onto you, and why immediate withdrawal might be your only protection. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.